My relationship with Josh was definitely love-hate. We're fraternal twins. We're not identical, but we still look alike, and we have the same group of friends and everything.
We grew up together. Like the three of us have known each other pretty much our whole lives.
It was my first day of work, working at the Department of Mechanical Engineering. I was starting there as an administrative assistant, so I wasn't really checking my phone. And I didn't realize that I had 6, 7 missed calls from my parents. And I called my mom, and she answered, and very frantically she was like, "I think something's wrong. I think your brother is in the hospital or something."
Mental health is so important because it really is equivalent to like a broken arm, a broken leg. It's something that takes time to heal, and I don't think people understand that. Just because you can't see the illness or the injury doesn't mean it's not there.
Mental health is most definitely important. It's, to me, the most important thing. You can't sustain a successful, happy life without it.
This is very important because it's basically the same thing as physical health.
It not only affects almost every aspect of an individual's life, but it affects the way that you look at yourself, the way you feel about yourself.
Mental health is the foundation element for people to be successful in life.
He was always baking at home. Like, there was always different snacks here and there, and I always had something at home to eat, to snack on, basically. We were also getting ready to drive to Oklahoma for his bake sale. The night before, we were supposed to make something like 500 or 600 mini cupcakes or something ridiculous like that. We were actually studying together. I had some homework to do, and he had a quiz or something. So we were up pretty late. It was probably 2, 3 a.m. I finished my homework, and I told him, "Hey, it's getting pretty late. Like, don't drive home." Like, I set up a pillow and some blankets downstairs on my futon. I was like, "When you finish your stuff, just go downstairs and sleep, and then leave in the morning." And like, without thinking anything else, I went to bed. And I woke up that morning, and I saw that like the sheets and the pillow weren't touched at all. Like, it was obvious someone didn't sleep there. I thought he just probably stayed up all night working on his work and then just went to class. Then I received a text from one of my classmates that said, "Joe, there's this police officer looking for you. Like, did you leave something in the class or something?" And I was like, "Oh, that's weird. Like, why would there be police looking for me if it was just a car accident?" And I called the OSU Police Department, and they're like, "Please meet me here. We have to drive to the hospital." And that's when it kind of hit that it was something a lot worse than a car accident. And my sister, I called her, and we got into the police cruiser, and we started driving towards the hospital. And that's when I noticed there were still a few cop cars left around. I decided to check Reddit because with the OSU subreddit, a lot of news is always there first. And I saw that there's news that somebody jumped from Lane Ave, and that was when I knew that that was probably him. And I was pretty shocked.
We like to live life so fast. If you don't prioritize mental health, like honestly a 3-hour class, you're probably gonna feel the effects later.
There are so many challenges for college students and their mental health that are just very unique to this age group. I think for one, making the decision to go to college is a pretty loaded decision.
This is the first time where usually a lot of people are in charge of their own decisions, financial decisions from, what you're gonna eat every day, but also like what classes you wanna take.
The classes are tough, they're strenuous, it requires a lot of discipline and working outside of the classroom since you may only have class 2 hours a day.
And a lot of students aren't rich or like financially well off, so they have to support themselves in some way, shape, or form, to the point where they can't just focus on school, so they have other stuff to do, and then they have social life, and then they have all these clubs, and then we're pressured by our future employers to be involved in non-paying other things.
We all enter college with, we're gonna have the best time, and we're gonna make all these friends, it's gonna be so easy to make friends, but you don't really ever think about the work that goes into it, and the work that goes into balancing all these different aspects of your life.
Like if everybody could just focus on school, there'd be very, very few instances of I can't do this. This mix is what throws people off.
And so it's also just a very just nerve-wracking time because you're hoping you're going to make all the right decisions.
How college is difficult on anybody. First and foremost, it's the change, A lot of people are not used to this environment, and I would be, I don't think I'm hard-pressed in saying that most people aren't. After my first semester, I had a lot of mental health struggles there at Miami. I ended up transferring then to Ohio State. When I was at Miami, and this is something that had happened all throughout high school and pretty much since I'd hit puberty and had the ability to break down how I felt the way that I felt and maybe ask that question as to why. It was something that, throughout my entire life, especially being a man, there was a lot of stigma against talking about any mental health struggles, especially ones that, you couldn't really reckon with when you were little, especially those times where you get up and you're just not feeling well. And you don't understand why, your parents don't understand why, and they can't offer you an explanation, and you can't offer yourself one.
This is very common. 1 out of 4 students are suffering with a mental health issue, yet less than about 30% get any help.
Before mental illness was talked about more openly, you were crazy if you had something wrong with you. And I think that's kind of stuck.
There's a lot of social stigma surrounding reaching out for help when you need something, if it's a psychological need versus like a medical need.
Stigma stops so many people from getting treatment. So we have to talk about these issues very openly. We have to make sure we equip our students with great cognitive, behavioral, and coping skills, again, before they get into crisis.
So I think the stigma and this idea that you could be crazy if you admit that something's going on inside your head really keeps people from being afraid to talk about it. And it's also really hard to explain if you haven't received a lot of education or guidance on it. It's not like a physical illness where you can point to it and say, like, this hurts because I fell on it.
We would not send a construction worker into a work site without a hard hat. How can we send our students throughout life without giving them evidence-based cognitive, behavioral, mindfulness, and coping skills?
So I just think to combat that stigma, we need to be more open in general, and just people need to talk about their mental health. Even if you don't have a mental illness, you just need to let people know, I'm someone that you can talk to about mental health no matter what you're going through. I'm here for you to do whatever you need to do to get better.
Wanting to start that really powerful conversation to destigmatize and to legitimize mental health is one of the best things about our generation. After my parents separated, I actually was kicked out of the house twice. There's a lot of childhood trauma that had built from those experiences. And so I think I was so stubborn that I really pushed back by way of my attitude and my temperament. So I was really I didn't like authority, so I talked back a lot.
Growing up, I was always a health conscious person, but never to an extreme. I always enjoyed everything and played sports and ate what I wanted. And then I got to college, and I think I took that as an opportunity when I was on my own to have control over a lot of things. With everything changing, your first year out of state, a lot of pressure with school and classes and deciding if this major is right for me, making friends. A lot of things were out of my control, and I think I needed something to bring into my control, and I took that with exercise and eating. So I've always been the type to get up early, but I would be going to the gym at 6 a.m. to run a 5K every day and then work out more, and it was just excessive. That's the only word I can use for it, was excessive.
I moved out of my dad's house and I lived with my grandmother, just the two of us. Starting when I was 16, my grandfather passed away and I was asked to go help her, so I packed up my things and I left. But something happened when I moved, and I had a lot of alone time. I think that when I was back at my old school, living with my mom or my dad, there was always people around. And being alone is a really dangerous thing when you have an underlying mental disorder that you really haven't unpacked.
My skin was always dry, even in the spring semester, like winter break had been over, like putting on a lot of moisturizer. What's going on here? I was dehydrated. My hair was getting thin, having a hard time growing. And even like my family noticed, like my parents were very honest with me. I would come home and they'd never be the type to comment on my appearance. I don't think anyone should comment on anyone's appearance unless someone's really unhealthy. And I think that's when my parents knew they could comment on my appearance. They're like, you're looking unhealthy.
And it was in that spring of 2016 that I laid in my bathtub on the second floor of our house. And it wasn't moments before that my grandma walked through the front door and yells up that she's home and that I should join her for a cup of tea. And little did she know that our previous night's cup of tea might have been our last. And this is something where I had to do a lot of reflecting going into college that upcoming fall. And I made a choice then to really bury it deep. I never wanted to have that feeling. I never wanted to be that low. So I pretended like it didn't happen. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think there's a lot of people who, fail to recognize, when something like that happens, because it's almost too painful to remember that it did. So I went off to college, and in the spring of 2017, I experienced my second suicidal episode. And having lived through this one as well, I was given a choice that I could either admit myself to a hospital or I would be escorted there by the police.
I would just be shaking for extended periods of time, especially when it came to pressure with school and classes. I couldn't handle the anxiety because my body didn't have the strength. So when I came back to New Jersey in May, my parents and I kind of agreed it was time to get help.
And so while surrounded by many of the Columbus officers and some psychiatrists, I made the decision to admit myself to the Columbus Springs, formerly Dublin Springs, mental health hospital. And while in the hospital, I received my diagnosis of major depressive disorder, general anxiety disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder.
There was this BI3D event called Big Talk, and the former BI3D coordinator had made these cards that had deep questions on it. And you were in a group of 4, and you had to talk through the questions with the other girls. And I was a little nervous, but I thought, hey, here's my shot to be open, be vulnerable, make friends. And the question was, what would you talk about more if you knew people wouldn't judge you for it? And I said to 3 girls I barely knew, I would talk more about having an eating disorder. And then one of the girls in the group said, oh, I had an eating disorder. And then we all just kind of shared, and she's one of my closest friends now. I think that was really a big step for me, was becoming more open about it and more vulnerable.
I wanted people to think that I was the Lauren that I am because I could do it on my own.
I didn't want to admit weakness. I didn't want to admit that something was wrong.
And this was a theme that I saw throughout my treatment and my recovery, where I wanted to be the only person who was getting me through it.
I've always been the type that no matter what came my way, I persevered.
But in reality, it took a village, and it took a lot of chemicals to get me there, which is okay.
I never had to get help. I just kind of pushed through and was strong on my own.
This treatment and my recovery went on, and it continues today. I think that being able to say that I have not had a suicidal thought since leaving the hospital is something that I'm very proud of. And you know, even though there's not always great days, I can happily say that there haven't been as many bad ones.
When I realized like my health was declining and my mental health was declining because of it, I knew that was time to reach out, and I'm so grateful that I did that.
So my thoughts on therapy is it is absolutely incredible.
Personally, like, I think therapy is awesome.
I have a therapist that I see regularly, and I'm very honest about that with the students, to kind of break down like the stigma.
Growing up, I did therapy once a week. I think that helped me tremendously.
You know, we go to the doctor once a year for a physical checkup. You have to get a physical checkup for most of your jobs, and nobody does that for mental health.
I needed somebody to lessen my burden.
You just need to have that time to either talk with someone or have any conversation with yourself about how to productively process these emotions.
And I think therapy, when you see someone as a professional, they're able to let you know if something is what you're calling it, or if you're mislabeling it, or if it's something else, which can get you properly treated, right? So if the end goal is to find yourself in a better place, you need to know exactly what you have in order to find that proper treatment.
The best decision I ever made was getting help and recovering, and finding that strength to ask for help. When I was very upset, it was right after the diagnosis, like a day or two, and it was around lunchtime, and my brother actually works at an office in Princeton, and I heard him come home for lunch, and I was in my room just kind of upset to myself, trying to cope with everything going on. It was all new. And he knocks on my door. He's like, "Why are you what's wrong?" And I was like, I'm really just like having a hard day. And at that point, during recovery, they wanted me to eat all these foods I was uncomfortable with, 3 meals a day, 2 cookies as a snack, just like break through everything. And I was struggling with it. And he knocked on my door and he said, "You know what? I will come home for lunch every single day if that means you sit down and eat with me."
How can we make Ohio State a campus that has a culture of care, where everyone's watching out for everyone that they walk by? We always have so much pride in being a Buckeye and being on Ohio State's campus, but to what extent? How far can we push that?
I remember that I was driving down Lane Avenue, and all of a sudden I saw a few people on the sidewalk kind of looking up and pointing, and there was a woman standing on the top of the Lane Avenue parking garage. Being that this was about a little over a year since my second episode, I wasn't quite ready to feel the surge of emotion that I did when I saw that woman on top of the parking garage. I was either, one, about to witness someone take their life, or I was going to be the person who just keeps driving. And I don't think I was prepared to do either, and so I pulled into the parking lot. I looked in the back of my car for, paper and a pen, and I wrote a sign that said, "You are loved." And for about 4 hours, I stood on the hood of my car, and I just held up the sign. I couldn't talk. I was violently shaking. And at one point, I think there were about 15 other people who had come, asked what I was doing, and once also seeing the circumstances, wrote out a sign with other encouraging phrases and words, and stood there with me. And it was about 6 hours later that she finally came down. And knowing that the woman was also, escorted to a hospital, probably in the same fashion that I was admitted to one just a year before, I felt like a really strong connection to this person. And to this day, I don't know her name, but I hope she's doing really well.
You're going to be able to start to notice that there is a culture of care here. Being on Ohio State, and that's super rare. Walking down the oval and being able to feel like you're cared about, feel like people have your back. It's one of the best things about Ohio State.
Personal thoughts, and the last thing I do want to leave with is do what we're doing. Just talk about it. Have a conversation, and it starts with people in every single part of Ohio State, because we are Buckeyes. We're all united under that.
Just like we have great evidence-based treatment for physical conditions, We have wonderful evidence-based treatment for mental health conditions. Bottom line is, don't suffer quietly.
I would say get help. It's always worth it. It will be the best thing you've ever done, and you will find so much strength you never knew you had.
There's an abundance of hope and of happiness to be had after asking for help.
Talk about it with somebody. Get help.
I think that's the biggest thing that I learned for myself is like how to ask for help, because I was very much like Joe in that I didn't want to burden anyone. Like I would not tell people if I needed to hang out, if I like needed a hug, if I just like needed to talk. Like I wouldn't tell people. But I think now I've gotten a little better at that.
Oh gosh.
Swinging for the fences.
Mental health is incredibly important, and I can't stress the benefits that I've experienced from prioritizing it.
I can ask for help, and that's something I really had to learn through this whole process, is that people are there, you just have to ask. And as cliche as it sounds, like it's true.